We have been married for almost 30 years and have two children. Marcus, our oldest, is 29 years old. He graduated from the police academy, and like me, he's a police officer. He is married to a wonderful girl and has a daughter, our granddaughter. Daughter Julia is 20 years old and still in university. While working as a police officer with the Central Police Department, I was injured and retired with the rank of colonel. But I didn't have to stay at home. My good friend invited me to work in the security service, in a company that is not poor. Good pension and more than high salary. In the end, we left our apartment to my son, and we moved to a cottage outside the city. A life in the countryside. What else can you dream of? Conchita moved to a part-time job and spent a lot of time at home. When I retired, I played guitar. I've been into it since childhood. When I studied at the institute, I even played in an ensemble. I never stopped playing. I just have more free time now. In our cottage, we had a great dry basement, so I turned it into my studio. A men's club, as Conchita jokingly called it. I spent practically all my free time in my studio. Now I could fully realize what I had dreamed of during my long years of service. I draped the brick walls with carpets, installed several video cameras to record my classes. The point is that on video, I could see my flaws in my game and try to correct them. In my studio, I accumulated a small stock of good alcohol and often sitting in my favorite chair, thinking that life was successful and nothing portends change. Soon my studio became a very popular place in our house, as it later turned out even very popular. At first Conchita was cool to my, as she said, blah, living by the principle, whatever the child is not to be pampered. But over time, I began to notice that she willingly comes down to my basement and enjoys watching movies there, drinking champagne with me. And my daughter dragged her girlfriends and friends down there on occasion. I treated their visits calmly because they did not affect my music lessons in any way. Despite the fact that my job was not particularly burdensome, I occasionally went on business trips from a few days to a week. One evening, when I was playing guitar with ecstasy, my boss called me and asked me to leave early in the morning for another city on business. I was even a little upset. I had completely different plans for the day, but it couldn't be helped. Work is work. Conchita, who got up with me to prepare breakfast, was also upset and even suggested that I quit my job because my pension was enough. We kissed goodbye for a long time and I left. The business was finished quite quickly, and 2 days later I left for home. I didn't get home until 1 o'clock in the morning on Friday. It had snowed during the night and the road had become almost impassable. I had to turn on 2 bridges to get home. In the morning, I ran off to work early and stayed there all day, writing up my trip report. In the evening, Conchita and I had dinner at my parents' house and then went to a concert. A trendy rock band came to see us, and we spent an unforgettable evening listening to our favorite songs. When we got home, I finally went down to my studio, sat down in my favorite chair, and picked up my guitar. When I picked up the remote to turn on the recording, I saw that the cameras weren't off. When I had played the night before the business trip, I had forgotten to turn them off in a hurry, and they had been idle for almost 2 days. I decided to erase the recording and started rewinding without turning off the monitor. Some footage flashed on the screen. I turned on the playback, and after a minute of watching, my world collapsed. I saw Conchita walk into my studio, holding the hand of our neighbor. His wife Vera and their daughter had moved into the house next door about a year ago. Sergio's daughter Lisa and my Julia had quickly become close friends. He was torn between trying to lift her skirt and unbuttoning his shirt with one hand as she held the other. I watched as the creep literally ripped her underwear off. I was numb as I watched my wife, bent over the arm of my favorite chair, being had by Sergio. How long I sat like that, staring at the screen, I don't know. It wasn't until I realized the movie was over that I came out of my stupor. My shock turned to anger and then to rage. My father always taught me that you should solve problems with a clear head, not let anger control you. Gather the facts, figure things out, and then decide how to proceed. People make stupid decisions when they're angry. I needed to sort things out so I knew how to proceed. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. Then I decided to watch the tape again. Who knew what it was costing me? After watching it, I realized this wasn't their first meeting. The asshole was feeling pretty confident in my studio. After they finished, he sat down in my chair without getting dressed. Conchita took out my cognac and sat on his lap. They sat naked and kissed, drinking my cognac. After drinking the bottle, they began to dress. Then Conchita brought another bottle of cognac and gave it to her lover, apparently liking his efforts. This one took my wife, drank my cognac, and took the bottle with him. Without leaving the studio, I dialed the phone number of the technical support group of the security service. After the second ring, the other end of the line picked up. I closed the studio and went upstairs. I was really lucky my wife wasn't home. It gave me time to get my emotions together. My daughter told me that mom had gone to her cousin's house. It's hard to say what I would have done if I had met my still wife after watching this movie with her in it. I was walking down an alley wet from the fall rain, passing my shadow from lantern to lantern. From somewhere in my stomach, a chill was rising through my veins to my head. I was suddenly calm, knowing full well that there was no going back. For 30 years I had believed and loved this woman, and even in my nightmare delirium, I had never imagined that she would step over me so cruelly. I read somewhere that 100% of women are willing to cheat on their husbands under certain circumstances. The only difference is the means and reasons for cheating, but mine isn't like that. Alas, as it turns out, she's just like everyone else. And there are two ways to stay cuckolds who do not want to know anything or to cover this couple and take revenge. I didn't hesitate to take the second path. I got home, and about an hour later, I dialed Conchita. It took a long time, but no one picked up. I dialed Conchita's sister. There was a long ring tone, then a sleepy voice. "Hello, Margot. Good evening," I said in a deliberately cheerful voice. "Do you have Conchita?" "Yes, she arrived about an hour ago." "Why?" Margot's voice was calm. "Put her on the phone." As calmly as possible, I said. "I can't reach her. She's not picking up." "Oh, Marcus, she's in the bathroom right now. She was helping me, and she's soaked to the skin. I'll tell her you were looking for her, and she'll call you back." Margot's voice had changed, not so calm. "Okay, I'll be waiting." I disconnected the phone. She never called back. Conchita arrived home 3 hours later, cheerful and excited. I no longer doubted that she'd gone to see her lover again. Well, she had chosen that path herself. After 2 days, I knew the full biography of the neighbor, his wife, and daughter. I was also fully aware of their love affair, knowing exactly how many times they had met. Conchita had been cheating on me for the last 6 months. What an actress, I had no idea. We've never had any intimacy problems. She was always satisfied in bed. But I guess I was the only one who thought so. The neighbor had lived for over 20 years and was totally dependent on her father, who owned several car dealerships. He was almost 10 years younger than me, and that in all likelihood was the deciding factor that pushed my wife into his arms. With Conchita at work and my daughter at university, I installed cameras in the bedroom, dining room, and hallway. My next business trip was due in a week, so we just had to wait. The week dragged on slowly. Outwardly, our relationship with Conchita had not changed. She still kissed me affectionately when I left for work. I was vomiting after what I'd seen in her mouth, but I tried to control myself, fighting the nausea, barely restraining myself from wanting to tell her everything and kick her out of my house. By the way, I didn't tell you the house was in my father's name. When we started building it, I was still on the police force, and I was having trouble with the legalities of construction. That's when my dad suggested that we register the plot and the house for ourselves. Moreover, he helped us with money and building materials anyway. Unlike my father, Conchita's parents were not very enthusiastic about the house and did not help us with money. A week later, I kissed my wife goodbye for the last time and left on a business trip. The past week seemed like an eternity to me. Of course, I didn't go on any business trip. I rented a hotel room, turned on my laptop, checked the cameras, and waited. As I expected, the neighbor appeared on the horizon about an hour after I left. He was greeted by an excited Conchita dressed in a see-through nightie. They tumbled merrily in our marital bed for about 3 hours. Then they decided to go down to the studio. I guess they liked the cognac, but that's where they had a bummer. When I left, I locked the door and took the keys. God, that bastard was so upset. But my wife quickly calmed him down orally. As they parted ways, Conchita suggested we meet tomorrow and have a raucous night as Julia, our daughter, was going to spend the night at a friend's house. Well, basically, there was enough evidence. All that was left was to swat the bastards and throw them out of my house, naked on the street. Sunday night, I went into the garage and pulled a scrap of police rubber stick out of my car. At first, I was tempted to get a baseball bat, but I was afraid I'd kill the creep and go to jail. But a rubber stick is the way to go. Besides, I also brought a 16-gauge hunting rifle, which I had accidentally left in the garage, rightly deciding that 2 bullets would be enough for revenge. I turned on the laptop and made sure the erotic show was in full swing. There was a door to the house from the garage, and I used it. As I quietly made my way up to the 2nd floor, I heard the sounds of lovemaking. Making love, not just sleeping together. I could clearly hear Conchita, in ecstasy, screaming her love to him. I turned off the camera in the bedroom and quietly approached the studio. I decided to proceed without Chinese ceremony. Opening the door, I saw Conchita lying on her back and the alpha neighbor nestled between her legs. I took 2 quick steps and silently struck the male in the face with a rubber stick. The blow was good. Blood splattered on the sheet, mixing with the other liquid. And the lover grunted something and fell to the floor with a clatter. There was an erotic pause, and then in the silence came the voice of my, as yet, wife. "Marcus, God, what are you doing here?" "I'm here, you damned cheater, to throw you out on the street. But what's good for a Mexican soap opera is not good for the realities of modern life. Get up and get out of here." I certainly said a more colorful word, as befitting in this case as the address at which Conchita was to advance. "But before you get out of here, I want to tell you that your lover is a piece of shit. He's got 2 other married mistresses besides you, and you're just another whore to him. By the way, that's what he bragged about to his buddies when he was drinking beer." I tried to keep my cool and not show any aggression. "I've emailed the video of his and your activities to your parents. Marcus, please, shut up. I don't care what you have to say. Not now, not later. So get up, get your shit, and get out of here." I nodded at the stirring lover. The neighbor seemed to have come to his senses. He looked at his bloody hands, trying to get to his feet. "What have you done? I'll kill you, you bastard." He clenched his fists and came at me. "I'm gonna smash you into the wall." I pointed the rifle at him. "Stay where you are." But he didn't seem to accept simple human words. I sighed and pulled the triggers. To duplicate. A load of finely chopped red and black pepper mixed with coarse salt slammed into his groin. The roar of a wounded hippopotamus, a pitiful squeak compared to the shriek this male let out. My lover fell on his back and rolled his legs with a loud shriek. Apparently he was no longer interested in me. My ego was triumphant. For such a spectacle, one would risk going to jail. After a while he quieted down, only staring at me fearfully and writhing his legs in pain. "She'll take you to the hospital now. I suppose you'll figure out what to tell the doctors. Otherwise, I'll send a video report of your escapades to your wife and father-in-law. It's not hard to predict their reaction. Now, both of you, get out." Through the window, I saw Conchita supporting her lover and putting him in the back seat of her car. I don't know what they said at the hospital, but nobody bothered me. Only a bribed policeman politely stopped me in the morning on the street and timidly asked if I knew anything about the night attack on my wife and her companion. Conchita was picked up from the hospital by her father. In the evening, he called me with a complaint as to why I had kicked his daughter out of the house. I affectionately inquired if he had looked at his email lately. He hung up on me and never called me again. Must have liked the video. Then the kids started calling. First, the son took a long time to convince me to forgive my mom, considering 30 years together. At the end of the call, he called me an asshole and hung up on me. Then Julia sat in the living room across from me for a long time and with tears in her eyes, told me how much my mom loved me, and you can't be so cruel to a person with whom you had 2 children and lived for so many years. I even had the impression for a moment that it was me who was tumbling around with the neighbor, not Conchita. Even my mother in careful expressions hinted to me that it would be good to forgive Conchita, said that everything happens, a girl lost her way. She said that all women have crises, then they do things they don't know what to do. I listened attentively to Mom and asked her if she had such crises too. I wondered if Dad knew about it. Mom answered nothing and quickly hung up the phone. We never spoke to her again. The next day, my father came to see me. "Let's go play." "I didn't know you played guitar." I didn't grin merrily. "There's a lot you didn't know." Dad's words sounded ambiguous. We went down to the studio. I pulled out a bottle of the finest whiskey and poured it into glasses. I've hated cognac for some time now. Father nodded understandingly. I picked up my old Strat and sat down on the stool. "You had a chair here, didn't you?" Dad asked, sitting down to play the drums. "I did, but it's gone." I put on my headphones and played the first chord. Something thumped downstairs. I looked at the clock. 10:30. Yes, my father and I played well last night, as they say, from the heart. I took my time getting dressed and scratching my belly, went down to the first floor. My father was sitting in the kitchen with a large coffee cup in his hand. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee swirled around him and rose to the ceiling. "Good morning, Dad." I looked for a clean mug. "Good morning." "Sit down, I just made coffee." Dad reached for the coffee pot. The matchmaker called and said he and Conchita would be here in an hour to pick up her things. Dad poured coffee into a cup and set it in front of me. "I need to stay with you." "Yes, Dad, stay." I suddenly found it hard to speak. I suddenly realized that only now I was beginning to grasp the horror of what had happened. Until then, it had all seemed like a nightmare, like it wasn't happening to me. We've been in love for nearly 30 years. What happened? Why is she doing this to me? Calm down, Marcus. Pull yourself together. Life doesn't end here. My father looked at me and his eyes glistened treacherously. He loved his daughter-in-law very much, and I knew he was going through a hard time too. Be a man and act like one. He started washing the mug. It was clear he was trying to do something to hide his pain. Mom will be here in a minute. Dad put the mug on the shelf and turned to me. She wants to look Conchita in the eye. Why, Dad? Why didn't you tell her not to come over? I felt bad enough, and I didn't want to see Mom cry. We're adults, we'll figure it out. Dad didn't say anything, just sighed. Through the open window, I heard a car pull up. The gate rattled, and my mother appeared on the path leading to the house. She came into the kitchen and kissed me on the cheek, scenting me with expensive French perfume. You have coffee left. Hello, Mom. I'll pour it for you. I got a cup. When are they coming? Mom looked at Dad. They'll be here soon. You sit down. I'll go get my laptop. I went upstairs to the bedroom. A teary-eyed Conchita and her father sat across from me and Mom. Behind me, behind my chair, my father was nestled in a chair. I placed the laptop on the table, sat down with a sigh, and looked at my wife, who was staring diligently at the floor, afraid to meet my gaze. It was clear from her concentrated face that she was desperately trying to gather her thoughts. Conchita, you wanted to talk. I'm listening to you. I tried my best to remain calm. Marcus, I owe you an apology, or rather to everyone. She started, raising her head. I can't find the words to say how much I regret what I did and how ashamed I am. There is no excuse for what I did. Marcus, I beg you, give me a chance to make amends. I loved, and I love only you. All I had with him was intimacy. It's like I've lost my mind, living in some parallel reality. Words came out of her mouth like dry peas. I especially liked the parallel reality part. You must have read a lot of science fiction. If you give me the opportunity, I'll do everything in my power to make it right. Conchita was already starting to repeat herself. I turned the laptop around and pressed the key. Yes, I love you, I love you. Marcus is no match for you. Conchita's voice, hoarse with passion, came from the speakers. You just say the word, and I'll leave him, and I'll be with you, only with you. Then came the distinctive sounds of unearthly love. I stopped the playback and looked at my wife. She seemed to only now realize the magnitude of what she had done. Reality had hit her like a freight train derailed. Conchita sobbed, not knowing what to do or even what to think. She knew she had to do something, but she couldn't find the right words. I stood up. Rage and resentment choked me. Conchita, tell me, how does it feel to know that you were just being played with and not loved? You were just another whore to that asshole. You ruined our family. What kind of bitch is that? You hate me so much. She looked at me through her tears. I don't hate you. Hating takes effort. You're nothing to me now. You don't exist to me. You've even managed to turn the kids against me. Hearing these words, my mother shuddered and looked pityingly in my direction. But I am your wife, Conchita said, choking back sobs. Shut up, I screamed with anger. I won't let you slander my wife's good name. My wife of 30 years was a loving and caring woman, my best friend who had my back, and the mother of my children. She's dead, and you're the trash that took over her body. Don't talk like you had anything to do with her. It was a few minutes before she spoke again. What am I supposed to do now? Do you really want to hear my answer? I've almost calmed down. The worst thing you could have done to our marriage was to cheat on me. Destroying our family for a piece of shit like that asshole. You've lost my respect. Once the kids find out the truth, they'll stop respecting you too, because you're a whore. No, I'm not. At least whores are sneaky. They know what they want. You're worse. The sight of you makes me sick. I'm bitter that I wasted 30 years of my life loving a bitch like you. Marcus, I'm sorry. Conchita fell to her knees, grabbing my legs. Her father scooped his daughter up under his arms, trying to lift her up. I couldn't bear it. It's hard to throw away someone you've loved for 30 years. I had only one wish, to get her out of my house as soon as possible. As she was leaving, her father came over, shook my hand, and said, "Thank you for letting me talk to you. I'll take it from here." My heart was pounding in my throat. It was getting hard to breathe. I felt a fire in my chest, rising to my head. An unbearable pain suddenly pierced my body. I tried to walk into the room, but my legs felt like they were falling through absorbent cotton. I involuntarily jerked and began to fall into a deep black well, and night fell. First, the sound came back. I heard some sort of hissing, and someone's voice said, "He's coming to his senses." Funny. Was I coming out of my mind somewhere? I opened my eyes. Bright light slashed across my pupils, making my eyelids close involuntarily. First question, where am I? I opened my eyelids again. Everything around me was white. The walls, the ceiling. I turned my head and squinted my eyes. The floor's white too. It looked like a hospital. My eyes slowly adjusted to the bright light. There were wires, rubber tubes, and a clothespin on my finger. My brain worked slowly, struggling to digest the information. "Marcus, can you hear me?" The same voice asked me. I nodded my head. "What's wrong?" I was having trouble speaking. "Don't worry, you're in the hospital. Everything is fine now." The kind uncle stroked my arm. "You're in intensive care, but tomorrow we'll move you to a regular room." What's wrong with me? I repeated the question. "Your heart couldn't handle the stress. You developed atrial fibrillation, a simple heart rhythm failure." "A heart attack?" "Oh, no. The doctor almost crossed himself. "It's just a rhythm disturbance. You can go home for a week. And most importantly, you absolutely mustn't worry. Rest and only rest. Tell him well. Don't worry. My life has gone to hell." The difficult events of the last few days have been running through my head. A nurse came into the room. She leaned over and said something softly to the doctor. "Marcus, your father and mother have arrived." The doctor smiled and adjusted the blankets that had slipped down. "You can talk, but just take it easy." The door to the ward creaked open. "Marcus, hi, how are you?" My father kissed my cheek. "You made us nervous." Behind him stood a crying mom. My dad carefully placed a bag on the nightstand. "It's fruit and juice. We're not allowed anything else yet." I smiled and nodded. "Thank you. Don't worry, everything's fine. I'll be going home soon." I tried to keep my voice upbeat to reassure my parents. The doctor came into the room. "Goodbye, Marcus needs to rest." Mom kissed my cheek and sobbed. "Get well, Marcus. We're looking forward to seeing you." While I was in the hospital, visitors came to see me. First, former colleagues, even the head of the department came. Then friends. My parents came every day. There came a point when I wanted to go home, to get away from the non-binding visits. I'd already walked and even smoked a couple of times in the stairwell. For some reason, I really wanted to inhale nicotine. I saw a familiar face in the hallway. It's my neighbor Alpha. But he didn't really look like Alpha. I got in good. Next to my neighbor, there was an unattractive, lanky guy. He was saying something to the sufferer, holding a tape recorder in front of him. I knew the worm, a captain from the investigative committee. I remembered him from work, pubic louse, so they're still digging. Of course, my wife's involved in this case, so they'll come after me sooner or later. On the other hand, there's no report on me, so there's no case. As they say, no body, no case. But there is a body, and it's still alive. I'm spitting. It's a little gloomy. All right, we'll take it from here. I watched my friends for a while, and then I went to my room. I got home on Friday. My heart was beating steady. On Monday, I filed for divorce. I didn't hide the reason, adultery. Conchita and I didn't have much to share. The kids were grown up. So the divorce should have gone smoothly. Speaking of children, neither my son nor my daughter came to the hospital. I guess they hold a grudge for their mom. Well, I know it hurts, but I won't impose. If I couldn't raise them to be decent people for 30 years, it's too late now. And besides, a mother is a mother. They know for sure that Conchita is their mother. There are questions about me. And I have some questions too. A woman doesn't become a whore all of a sudden. It's a gradual process, so there's no guarantee that both children are mine. I didn't dwell on that thought, mine or not mine. It doesn't matter. I don't have a family anymore anyway. I wish I'd left no one behind and my lifeline would be cut off. Still, kids give me a reason to think I didn't smoke the sky for nothing. I had the DNA evidence. I dropped everything off at the lab and paid the money. Now all I had to do was wait. Fall crept up on me. I sat in my studio on an old leather sofa I had recently brought from an antique store and played my guitar. The light from the floor lamp formed a bright circle that caught the edge of the rug hanging on the brick wall and a piece of unpainted floor out of the darkness. I took another swig of whiskey and ran my fingers over the strings, sad and nasty on my soul. Fall always brings sadness, and this current one especially so. I was left without a wife, without children. Life didn't make sense anymore. I hadn't gotten the DNA results back yet, but I was getting used to the idea that I was no longer a husband or father. The doorbell rang. I went upstairs and looked through the door peephole. There were my children standing on the porch. Che, what do you want? I tried not to raise my voice. Let us in. We want to talk. My son always tried to be reasonable. I opened the door, and they stopped in the hallway. My daughter sat down on the ottoman. We want to know why you chased Mom away. Julia was the first to speak. Ask her. I shrugged my shoulders. We asked, now we want to hear from you. Marcus spoke up. We have a right to know. I already said. Ask your mother about it. I was starting to boil at their behavior. Well, we'll leave you alone. Okay, we'll be with Mom. We want you to know that we think what you did was despicable. Everyone has the right to make a mistake and to be forgiven. Marcus looked at his sister. We have nothing more to say to you, and nothing you say is of any interest to us anymore. You are completely out of our lives. It was very clear. I was silent. I had nothing to say to them. Julia stood up and walked towards her room. After a while, she came out with a backpack in her hand. I thought I had the best father in the world, but now I realized what you're really like, and I don't want anything to do with you anymore. She walked over to her brother, and he took the backpack from her hands. What you did to Mom is the most disgusting and unimaginable thing I could ever think of. I never want to see you again. I don't have a father anymore. Marcus turned to his sister. Come on, he makes me sick. Through the window, I watched them come down from the porch, walking to the gate. I deleted their numbers from my phone's memory, but from my memory, I can never delete them. The divorce went smoothly. The harried aunt handed us the divorce certificate and stamped our passports. Conchita tried to talk to me a few more times, but I hung up. There was no point. I never saw the kids again. They cut me out of their lives. They didn't communicate with my parents either. Sergio's alpha neighbor and his family moved out before the new year. I wasn't interested in his fate. I was only glad that he was unlikely to recover from the wounds he had inflicted. I did not inform his wife and father-in-law of their husband's and son-in-law's adventures. He had had enough. I stood looking at myself in the mirror, a bearded grandfather. What had I gotten myself into? Well, as one of the greats said, love comes and goes, but you always want to eat. It was time to strike a new chord in my life. It had been 2 years. It was early March. Was I happy during those 2 years? It's hard to say unequivocally, but probably not. Loneliness is a scary thing. Being alone after 30 years of marriage is hard. No matter what anyone says, my marriage was good. I loved my wife. Maybe not hysterically, but with a clear and pure love. I never had the thought of changing Conchita. She was everything to me, and most importantly, a trusted friend, a true wife. Maybe one of the few. No, the only one I could rely on. Too bad Conchita didn't think so. I was born on March 7th, the eve of the great holiday of all women. Not only do we owe them all year, but on this day we owe them even more. On my birthday, we used to go to a restaurant as a family. My parents and Conchita's parents would join us. Laughter and jokes, a table bursting with hors d'oeuvres, dancing, and then all-night-long hot lovemaking with my wife until the wee hours of the morning. On the morning of March 7, the weather finally turned bad. The sky was covered with clouds, and by lunchtime, it was sticky wet snow. I knew that nobody would congratulate me except my parents, so I didn't count on anything on that day. My mother was busy around my father, trying to please him in every way, and lately she had never left him alone. It was like she was praying for some sins, or maybe I thought she was. I poured myself half a glass of whiskey, and some inexplicable sadness came over my shoulders, and this on my birthday. I shook my head, straightened my back, and gave myself a fig leaf. I'm gonna go to a restaurant. I didn't go to restaurants much in my life. I didn't go there often, mostly on my birthday. Tonight would be a good time. I put on black jeans new, a white shirt, and a black velour jacket. I looked in the mirror. A not very old man was looking back at me with signs of suffering on his face. Everything was fine, but something was missing. I realized it was missing metal. I put a white gold chain around his neck, and on the ring finger of his right hand, I put a solid nut with a coat of arms, like a family ring. A little thought, and on his right wrist, I clasped a silver bracelet with black agate inserts. That's it, I think. The finished look. Interesting. Is the slight unshaven look still in vogue or not? The evening began as usual. I sat at a small table in the far corner of the room. The crowd was buzzing around me, and the waiters were scurrying silently between the tables. There was live music in this restaurant, and I waited for the musicians to take their seats. Finally, the first musician showed up. He switched on the microphone, made himself comfortable in his chair, and habitually placed his hands on the keys as if absorbing the energy of the instrument. My heart was sad, and I desperately wanted to listen to something lyrical, more like blues. I sat silently, tuning into the music. The small stage where the old piano stood was dimly lit, and the figure of the musician leaning over the keys was not particularly striking. I realized that he would be playing alone. I wondered how his music would break through the drunken hum. The people in the hall murmured even louder. Somewhere a woman was laughing gaily, and there were scraps of loud conversation. It seemed that the people gathered in the hall were celebrating some event that was very important for everyone. As if our national soccer team had finally won the European Championship. It was on this evening that the year's accumulated stock of unrealized joy came out and raged to the detriment of all enemies. Good evening. A young waitress in a short skirt put a cup of coffee in front of me. The crowd is full. 3 plans have already been made. With a mysterious look, she said, leaning over to my ear. Congratulations. I took a sip of coffee. The girl put whiskey in a crystal decanter and a metal mug with crushed ice on the table. For some reason, the carafe reminded me of a diver in a spacesuit. I'll get some cold appetizers. The girl deftly poured 2 fingers of whiskey into the glass. She asked, trying to overpower the noise. You're celebrating something. A birthday. I was finishing my coffee, which had already cooled down, when the pianist struck the first chord. He didn't play loudly. His music couldn't cover the noise in the room. It was just background music, nothing more. I listened with my glass in my hand. It was an old New York blues, in my favorite key, giving me the opportunity to improvise. The musician's fingers habitually tapped the keys, voicing the main theme. In the music, I heard the longing of a lonely heart. I cut myself off from everything. From the smoky hall, from the noise of conversations, from the shrill laughter of painted girls, I drowned in the music. I had never been to New York, and my idea of it probably had little to do with reality. But that's how I saw it. A jungle of stone and a lonely heart lost in it. The pianist's fingers ran through 2 octaves and stopped. There was a piercing silence in the hall. People looked at the stage, and some had tears in their eyes. The waiters with trays in their hands froze, and even the fat barmaid looked out of the frame of her cupboard, wiping her reddened eyes with a handkerchief. There were lonely claps, which gradually grew into applause. Someone even shouted bravo. But everything ends and returns to normal. Soon the hall was habitually noisy, knives and forks clattered on plates, girls laughed shrilly. A young lady asks permission to sit at your table. She's sitting over there. The waitress, who had crept up unheard, nodded toward the young woman sitting near the stage and took the empty cup. Looking in your direction. Conspiratorially, she muttered. I shrugged and looked toward the stage. A rather pretty woman was looking at me, smiling. I in turn smiled as well. Invite. I turned to the waitress. And bring another instrument. The pianist played another jazz composition. Good evening. My name is Milagros. The stranger sat down on the chair and smiled welcomingly. She plays beautifully. It's so hard to hear live music these days without being spoiled by electronics. Order me some champagne. The final chord sounded. That was it. The evening was coming to an end. I looked at my watch. 1:15 midnight. The people in the hall slowly began to disperse. Someone left alone, someone more fortunate, dragged under the arm of an inebriated friend, or vice versa. Noiseless shadows between the tables, hastily running waiters, on the way counting the proceeds and tips. It was business as usual. Milagros ran to the ladies' room to powder her nose. I sat at the table, ready to pay for dinner. Man, can I buy you a cigarette? An inebriated female voice sounded behind me. A drunken girl looked at me with a challenge. I had failed to get a beau for the evening, and I wanted to take out my anger from unsuccessful hunting on someone. I handed her the pack. She fumbled around for a long time, trying to pick up a cigarette with her long fingernails, but she wasn't very good at it. Finally, my patience ran out. I pulled out the cigarette myself and put the filter in the stranger's mouth. All that was left was to give her a light. The girl, swaying slightly, looked at me dazed for a while, then said, "Take me home." I realized that if I sent her away, a scandal would break out, and the girl seemed to be ready for a conflict. But no sooner had I opened my mouth than Milagros appeared from the semi-darkness of the smoky hall. "Get out of here, you skank," she said in a low but damn persuasive voice, almost without opening her painted lips. The girl shuddered, looked fearfully at her rival, and hurried quickly toward the exit, stumbling on her long heels. "Thank you, you saved me." I nodded politely and furtively glanced at my watch. It was late, time to go home. My gesture didn't go unnoticed. "Don't worry, I have a car to take you wherever you want to go." Milagros' eyes glistened moistly. She was still young and lavishly endowed with beauty. Even in the semi-darkness of the hall, it was hard to take my eyes off her. And her voice, velvet, husky, penetrated every cell of my body, making the proverbial butterflies in my stomach move. She was clearly younger than me, but I couldn't tell her age. "So, do you agree?" The woman looked me in the eye. The red Toyota started instantly. Milagros turned left, and the car pulled onto the empty street at this late hour. "Let's stop by my place first, and I'll give you some wonderful Arabic coffee. My husband recently brought it back from the Emirates." "Husband," I whispered fearfully. "Yes, husband. Don't you feel embarrassed?" The woman smiled enigmatically and licked her lips. Suddenly, I wanted to go home. "Don't worry, he won't bother us. My husband has gone to play preference, which means he won't be back until Monday. Besides, we've been separated for almost a year now. I have problems, and then there's my husband. They don't live if he comes back, and I'm having coffee with his wife in the middle of the night." That thought didn't make me feel any better. What kind of husband is it that travels easily at night and plays cards? Before I knew it, the Toyota was already speeding out of town. We're going to an upscale neighborhood. I had a thought, and that's right. After passing through the guard post, the car turned into an alley and stopped in front of a fluted gate. Here we are. Cooed Milagros and jumped out of the cab. I won't park the car in the driveway. They'll take you home. We climbed the steps of the marble-faced house, and Milagros, digging in her purse, pulled out a bunch of keys. The heavy door swung open. Please, she invited us in and was the first to step through the dark doorway. A switch clicked, and we found ourselves in a huge hallway. Between the window openings hung paintings of expensive old temples. A large maroon carpet lay on the floor, resting against the legs of an antique sofa. But that was not the main thing. On a small platform, almost in the center, stood a white grand piano. I carefully lifted the lid. Under the sheet music, lined up in a row, were the golden letters Petrov. I pressed the key. A clear, bell-like sound echoed down the corridor. The door slammed, and an imposing elderly lady rolled a serving table into the room. My nostrils caught the aroma of coffee. In addition to the coffee pot, there was an open bottle of red wine on a tray. The lady silently filled the glasses, looked at me disapprovingly, and walked out. This is Martha, my housekeeper. Don't mind her. Deep down, I knew where this was going, but I also knew I couldn't resist it. Milagros gently touched my cheek with her warm palm. You're funny. The bedroom was on the second floor. A huge bed under a white canopy, a dresser piled with feminine trinkets, dim lights, and the subtle scent of lavender. It all inspired madness. And before I knew it, I was in bed with a piano lover. She gave herself without foreplay, and only when she felt me inside her, as if she remembered something, but after a few sweet moments she forgot again. She looked at me as no one had ever looked at me before, an understanding look and noticing everything. I felt and heard all of her, the passionate shivering of her body, her frequent breathing, her escaping moans. Milagros pressed her whole body against me and kissed me greedily on the lips. We were only able to stop in the morning, unable to get enough of each other. And then, when it was over and her head was resting on my chest, I was still holding her hand, as if I were still afraid of losing her. That's how Milagros came into my life. About 3 months after the divorce, there was another knock on my door. It was my kids. Oh my God, Daddy, we're so sorry. We had no idea. Julia started. Don't waste words. I raised my hand to stop her. From now on, we have nothing to say to you, and everything you say is of no interest to us. You have completely disappeared from our lives. I never want to see you again. I don't have a father anymore. You have forgotten what you told me months ago, refusing to address the situation. I looked them straight in the eye. And as for calling me father, you gave up that right yourself. If I were you, I'd find out from your mother who your biological father it is. I know for a fact that it can't be me, because none of my children can judge someone without finding out. If you want to get your stuff, I'll be home all day tomorrow. Just don't bring your mother with you. They stood for a while longer, maybe waiting for me to invite them into the house. Then they turned and walked slowly toward the gate. When the gate slammed, I cried. You must go now. Milagros pulled up her negligee. Martha will take you. Her tone had changed markedly, a note of authority. She wasn't talking to me, she was commanding me. Well, what other way to treat a poor, unattractive man who was only fit for a single use? I had the situation figured out perfectly. All right, I'm out of here. I don't seem to have any prospects with this woman. Wow, you're singing. About the prospects thought, although willingly gives her husband horns, but divorce him is not going to. Who would voluntarily give up the sweet life? Come on. Martha's waiting. Milagros rose from her chair, showing her audience was over. Thank you. Don't bother, Marta. I'll take the bus home just fine. Suit yourself. Milagros shrugged and handed me the money. This is for the road. I pretended not to notice the bills. I turned silently, walked quickly down the stairs and out into the street. To be honest, I had no idea where the bus stop was. A resentment grated on my heart. She wiped herself with me and threw me away like a used gasket. Comparing me to a gasket made me even more depressed. Okay, if anything, I didn't know her until last night. I just got a lot of nonsense in my head. You gotta lighten up. I walked quickly toward the highway. talking to myself, trying my best to calm myself down. I'd learned enough about women to know that most of them would behave the same way in a similar situation. I shook my head, as if I wanted to push the dark thoughts away. I got to the highway, quickly caught a random car, and was home in 40 minutes. No sooner had I showered and made coffee than a car pulled up outside my house. A few minutes later, the wicket doorbell rang. I looked at the intercom screen. At my gate, impatiently shuffling from foot to foot, stood an unfamiliar representative man. Could it be Milagros' husband who had tracked me down? That was the first thing that came to my mind. A thief's hat is a thief's hat. The stranger went up on the porch and rang the doorbell. "Hello, Marcus." The man said hello politely, but he didn't offer me his hand. "Ramos wants to see you right away." I glanced at the phone clutched in my left palm. The man smiled understandingly with the corner of his lips. "Your phone is disconnected, so the chief sent me. I'm waiting for you in the car." He turned and headed for the gate. I wondered why my father needed me this early. I looked at my phone. I'd completely forgotten I'd turned it off last night before I'd indulged in my depraved voluptuousness. For all my desire to forget about Milagros, she wouldn't leave my mind. There was a spark between us, but alas, she's married. I've already meddled in her relationship with her husband without even taking my shoes off. How am I any better than the proverbial alpha neighbor? The thought of that made me feel bad, but no matter how hard I tried, the image of Milagros lingered in my mind. On the high-speed elevator, I went up to the 12th floor and, accompanied by the secretary, passed through the pre-opened door of my father's office. By the way, I forgot to clarify. When I finished school, my father already occupied the chair of a large metallurgical plant, and my mother worked as head of a dental clinic. And to say that my family lived in prosperity is to say nothing. My parents could afford almost everything, but only for themselves. They were very afraid that I'll grow up brainless life burner who does not know the value of money, so they didn't spoil me much. So, I've been here many times, and I was always surprised at my father's ability to create a cozy workplace. His office was very functional. A huge desk made of stained oak stood near the window. Along the walls there was a row of custom-made chairs. The same chairs were placed along a side table that stretched for several meters, right in the middle of the office, dividing it into two equal parts. To the left was a large closet, and exactly opposite was a bookshelf made of the same material. On the walls hung several paintings, unknown to me artists, of course originals. My father would hang copies or reproductions on the walls, God forbid. Behind my father's back hung, illuminated by fluorescent lamps, the company's logo, a silver cross on a black and red chessboard background. To be honest, I could never understand what it meant. There were several books on the shelf, and on the very top, on a special wooden stand, there was a heavy medieval sword. I remembered it well from my childhood, and always wanted to touch it during my infrequent visits to my father. When my father saw me, he pushed back his chair and came over to me and kissed me on the cheek. "Hey, Marcus." "Hey, is something wrong?" I sat down in the chair across from my father's desk. It is." Dad sat back in his chair and looked at me intently. "Marcus, it's time to end your vacation and get down to business." Dad took out a cigar and, cutting the tip, began to smoke it. I jumped up and down. "Daddy, are you smoking?" "No, I'm dabbling. Don't tell Mom." He exhaled a cloud of fragrant smoke with pleasure. "I'm in my 70s. I should retire." I was beginning to see where my father was going with this. "It's time for you to take over the company." Dad put the burning cigar in a massive bronze ashtray. "I'll help you at first, and then you'll be in charge." I was a mechanical engineer by training, graduated from the same university as my father, but I had never worked in manufacturing. To be honest, I'm a little tense. "Dad, I don't have any experience in metallurgy. Would I be able to be at the helm of such a huge company right away?" I looked at my father anxiously. You'll learn." Dad took another drag from his cigar. "You'll have a good consultant. You'll meet him today." "Dad, don't talk in riddles." "What kind of counselor?" "Take your time. You'll see tonight. This is your first Deputy Milagros. She's been with us for a long time. By the way, her husband Daniel works here too. They've been divorced for about a year now. My father slammed his palm on the table. Well, all in good time. Dad stood up and walked over to me. I realized the audience was over, shook my father's hand, and turned toward the door. Marcus, my father's voice was very quiet. Are you thinking of getting married? I turned to my father. No, Dad, I've been having trouble with women, I stammered after Conchita. My father looked at me understandingly. Okay, we'll talk later. He didn't even ask if I agreed or not. Family business, that's the way it is. I was brought home and left alone until the evening. I couldn't get Milagros, the deputy CEO, out of my head. I wondered what she was like. I looked up. Right in front of me on the wall was a fly-infested calendar from last year with a nude beauty. On the most interesting place of the beauty lazily crawled half-dead last year's fly, stupefied from the heat. Shit, it's March 8th. I grabbed the phone and dialed my mom. I listened to her wailing and crying for a long time. She was very upset that her grandchildren didn't communicate with her. I listened patiently and disconnected. I wanted to call the woman I'd spent the night with, but I remembered that she hadn't given me her phone number. I sighed. I wondered if the fly would crawl to the pretty lady's head. I looked at the calendar. For a second, I thought the naked girl was looking at me with sympathy. I winked at her and went to bed. By evening, the cold March rain had turned into a lingering phase. The car was speeding along the country highway, occasionally flashing its headlights at wet, bare bushes on the bends. At first, I looked out the window, trying to figure out where we were going. But in the blackness of the spring evening, it was impossible to see anything from the car window. I gave up this pointless occupation and looked at the back of the driver's head. I dozed off to the rustle of tires and soft music. I woke up to the sound of the door slamming. To the right of the car stood a young man dressed in a strict suit. Please. He held out his hand to me and at the same time, with his other hand, opened his umbrella. I heard the rain drumming desperately on the stretched fabric and got out of the car. To be honest, I was shocked. This is my nighttime friend Milagros' house, or rather, her family nest. So that's who my future deputy is. I wonder if her husband is here or not. As the Papuans of New Guinea say, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I made my way towards the entrance, illuminated by multicolored lights. As I climbed the snow-covered steps, the door swung open. A maid appeared on the threshold and ushered me into a small living room. The mistress will be here in 5 minutes. What can I get you? Cognac, whiskey, champagne. Thank you, I'll just warm up. I stretched my cold hands toward the blazing fireplace and shivered. It was a short walk from the car, but I was getting cold. As I settled into the chair, I looked curiously at the paintings hanging on the walls. I'm not a big fan of painting, but I needed to come to my senses, especially since I hadn't seen this very room last night. The door creaked open and Milagros entered. The hostess looked quite elegant in a strict, dark blue business suit with a white blouse, blonde, straight hair. Now, unlike last night, her appearance was more associated with the head of a large, successful company. She smelled of business acumen, of expensive perfume, and with it of big money and social standing. Milagros looked at me in surprise with the misty gaze of a mistress of life. The surprise was immediately replaced by unconcealed fear. She quickly looked around and came toward me. Are you crazy? Who let you in here? It was obvious that she was shocked, too. I'm busy right now. I have a reception. All the executives are here. The new CEO is coming. Hello, Milagros. Nice to see you, too. I got out of the chair, walked up to the hostess, and kissed her brazenly on the lips. She did not resist. For a moment, she froze in my arms. Then she pushed me away and looked me straight in the eye. Crazy, they might see us. Her voice broke with excitement. You didn't care yesterday. Why didn't you tell me you were divorced? How do you know? I know I have long arms. I kissed her again. You lady, don't hesitate. I can get married too. Milagros laughed. And you won't cheat. Never. I told you I have an appointment today. My new boss is coming. The owner's son. She thought for a second. Then she looked at me critically. I was dressed in yesterday's pattern, black jeans, white shirt, and black blazer. A heavy chain was visible on the collar of the shirt, dressed like a ninjas pro. All right, go down the hall into the big lobby. Hang out with the crowd. Then I'll find you and we'll have time to socialize. Milagros' last words sounded playful and ambiguous. She wrinkled her nose funny, pecked me on the cheek, and disappeared. Hello. Do you have an invitation? The man who opened the door to the huge hallway scrutinized my outfit. Milagros invited me. Are you a musician? The man smiled. Come in. You're about to be escorted out. An unknown girl jumped up to me and took me by the hand and dragged me deep into the house. At last we found ourselves in a small room. Stay here. I'll call you. The maiden was looking at an open black folder with a businesslike look. You play for half an hour, then you'll be paid and escorted to the parking lot. Clearly, my interaction with the guests is off limits. What can I do? I'll have to play. I can't disappoint my hostess. I sat down and started kneading my fingers. In 15 minutes, the businesswoman led me into the hall. There were many guests. I immediately saw Milagros with a glass of champagne surrounded by young men. She hadn't seen me yet, and she didn't react to my appearance. I sat down at the instrument, placing my hands on the keys. I looked around at those present. Everyone was busy. Some of them were making small talk. Some were eating dinner and snacking on champagne. They didn't care about me. It was a familiar atmosphere. I was about to start when suddenly a familiar figure flashed in the motley crowd. Mom. Behind Mom's back, my father appeared. I could see that my parents recognized me, but carefully pretended that we didn't know each other. Okay, at least there are two women in the audience for whom I'd be happy to play. I began to play the music softly. Then the music soared above the hall, rising higher and higher. I soared above the world, stringing more and more sounds on the sheet music. Finishing one piece, without pause, I began to weave another musical canvas. And it seemed that I was playing one extremely long piece. My mother stood mesmerized the whole time. There was no one else in the audience for me. I was playing only for her. The lights were dimmed, but I could see tears in her eyes. I was finished. There was applause in the hall. I stood up, bowed, and without looking at anyone, walked out of the hall. A girl ran out after me. Your money. She handed me an envelope and asked me if I could find a way out. Before I could recover, the same girl reappeared. She was already making me dizzy. Marcus, Mr. Rocco wants to talk to you. Who is he? You don't know? The girl was obviously disappointed. He's the biggest industrialist in our region. He's here with his wife. They're waiting for you in the lobby. How do you do? I bowed slightly and even shuffled my feet, and despite my years, the dazzlingly beautiful woman and his companion looked at me with obvious interest. Out of the corner of my eye, I realized that most of the guests were looking at us. It seemed to me that even the noise in the hall became quieter. The hostess had left her companion and was watching us closely. In her eyes, I caught genuine interest and surprise. Young man, your playing is beyond praise. What is your name? In a melodious voice asked the woman, taking me under her arm. Her companion stared at me in silent amazement. Marcus, I answered bravely. Strange, for some reason I didn't feel awe of this oligarch. The man nodded and leaned toward me and said softly, You won't be here tonight either. Ramos, stop it. My mother murmured affectionately, still holding my hand. Don't upset the boy. Stop walking around, my father grumbled. We have work to do. Marcus, stay in the gym. Mom stroked my arm. Mom's always mom. I smiled and took her hand. Dad stepped forward and the hall fell silent. Gentlemen, I think we will thank our musician for the pleasure. He handed the flute to a waiter who jumped up and clapped. Soon there was loud applause in the hall. Father raised his hand and the hall fell silent again. Aya would like to congratulate our women today on a wonderful spring holiday. I have prepared gifts, and tomorrow you will see them on your account from the management of the company. Let me present you with flowers. Young men came into the hall with bouquets of flowers. While they were handing them to the culprits of the celebration, my father turned to me and winked. One more thing, gentlemen. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to my successor, my son, Marcus Rocco. My father gave me a gentle push forward. Everyone froze. In the silence that followed, the clatter of a champagne glass falling out of Milagros' hand was distinctly audible. It is clear that this night I also spent with my deputy. The day after the company's board of directors unanimously approved me in my new position, I finally sat down in my dad's chair. So, settle in, get some experience. If anything, you know how to find me. Dad shook my hand and walked out. I sat for a while, gathering my thoughts, staring at the wall in silence. Then I got up and poured myself some whiskey. I pressed the selector button. Send Milagros in. A few minutes later, she came into my office. She was wearing minimal makeup. My heart sank. Am I in too much of a hurry? On the other hand, the years go by. I'm sick to death of an empty house. Come on in. I made an inviting gesture with my hand. You shouldn't have reminded me of the important business of the day. I walked right up to my deputy. I remember your promise, Milagros said and unzipped her skirt. Close the door, Marcus. I understand this is going to take some time. Eventually, my wife, 2-year-old son, and I were sitting on the outdoor terrace at a cozy little cafe enjoying the warm summer evening. From our place, we could see perfectly how the burgundy sun, tired for the day, was setting into the sea. From somewhere came the soul-disturbing sound of a saxophone. My heart ached sweetly. I looked at Milagros and smiled. We had already lived for 3 years, and 3 years was endless happiness. Suddenly, my attention was caught by a woman. She walked over and sat down at a table to a desperately young blonde woman. I recognized her immediately. It was my ex-wife, Conchita. Something made my heart ache. I still loved her, but the one with whom I had lived happily for almost 30 years. This new one was a stranger to me. The last time Conchita contacted me was 3 years ago. She emailed me copies of the children's DNA. Both kids were mine. I already knew that. She looked good. Still beautiful, just changed her hair. Now it was cut into something more avant-garde and daring. She put on a little weight, but it suited her. She smiled as sweetly and often as before, but in a different way. I realized her smile had become more natural. In the last year we'd been together, she hadn't been real with me, and I'd blindly failed to notice it. For the last 6 months of our life together, she had taken her love to a younger man. He was like a custard brownie to her, light, sweet, and delicious, but never satisfying as a meal. Like sugar, it had no substance. That's why she didn't divorce me. To her, I was steak of the highest grade, satiating and best eaten slowly to savor the flavor. It took Conchita a long time to realize the constant sweet eating was ultimately unsatisfying. She didn't realize then that her whole venture was doomed to failure. Her current craze is getting shorter and shorter in duration. Time can't be cheated. She doesn't want to think about it ending someday yet. But by now she must have regretted more than once that she destroyed her marriage and her family. And for what? Nothing. For the taste of sugar. Sweet but bitter sugar. Some nights she cries with self-pity, but no one cares anymore. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.